Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on planning and organizing. My name is Sumitra, and I have my colleague Vishal along with me, who is going to co-facilitate this session.
Hello, everybody.
We'll share a little bit about ourselves, definitely, and the organization that we represent. But before we get there, just wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone who could make it to this session. We're under very strange circumstances, and I think about a month back, we barely predicted that we would ever get into this situation, but we are. And we're trying to the best of our abilities to ensure that, we are effective, we're doing what we're supposed to do. And probably, in situations where you have uncertainty, where there is ambiguity, that's where the necessity of planning becomes even higher. Because once we're able to kind of plan, doesn't mean that everything will be executed all the time, but at least it gives us some sense of clarity, some sort of confidence, a sense of direction, most importantly, and it also ensures us that we're focused, right? It helps us to kind of validate a lot of times what we are doing as well. And today, this is essentially what this session is all about. It's just a 1-hour webinar. So we're not here to say that we'll cover each and every tactics or techniques about time management. But the intention is to kind of make you aware about certain things that sometimes we unconsciously do, and to see if we can be more, consciously making an effort to do that. So on that note, I'll hand it over to my colleague Vishal, who will explain to you a little bit more about this session and also take you through the objectives and the overall agenda. Over to you, Vishal.
Thank you, Sumitra. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining on time. People who will be joining in afterwards, they can just stay in this session. So we will begin. To start with, have you ever wondered how is it that some people seem to have enough time to do everything that they want to, whereas there could be few people who always seem to be rushing from task to task and never seem to really finish anything. To be honest, I have myself been that person who is still transitioning from the former to the latter. I'm still working on tools to manage my time effectively. Now, it cannot be just that some people have less things to do. It's much more likely that they're using the time more effectively. In other words, showing good time management skills. All of you would know, this is very basic, that time management is the ability to essentially use your time productively and efficiently. You could also think of it as the art of having time to do everything that you need without feeling stressed about it. Though it sounds very simple, but it is much harder in practice. The webinar today, it will be about 60 minutes in which we'll be spending in this webinar. It aims to explain some of the proven principles behind the good time management. Before we move ahead with the program, I'll very quickly introduce me and my colleague Sumitra. Maybe she'll take a few seconds to introduce herself. Sumitra, would you help us to move to the second slide? Thank you. My name is Vishal. I've been working for about 10 years, more than that. I started working with Wipro, moved on to various industries, worked for Barclays, Convergys. I've been with iTrain for a fairly long time. Training has been my area of interest since the beginning of my career. Sumitra, very quickly, if you would like to say a few words about yourself.
Sure. I think as far as iTrain is concerned, it's been over 9 years that I have been with iTrain. Overall in learning and development, 15 years. And in my experience of having worked with people in different profile, in different industries, what I have realized is that barring the time management, tools and so on and so forth, we have our own way of dealing with time. We have our own way of managing our work. And sometimes it could be just a personal preference, but a lot of times it has to do with the profile that we are in, the designation probably, or wherever we feature in the org chart, the kind of work environment that we are in. And in today's session, while we're talking about a lot of tools and all, what I'll try to do is that see how I can integrate my experience of having worked with those professionals, their struggles, and see how I can integrate best in this session as Vishal walks you through those various tools. Of course, having been in this situation, I'm sure a lot of you are parents out here. The struggle gets a little bit higher during this situation because you have on one hand sometimes parents to take care of, you have your own kids to take care of, and then there is household work, and then there is work from home also, which is happening. So let's see what we can do best in the next 45 minutes to help you revisit the way you do things. Thank you, Vishal.
Thank you, Sumitra. So, well, just before we begin and move on to the next slide, I mean, guys, generally the kind of trainings that we are used to do is the one in classroom, where the interaction is, plays a very important role in kind of driving the entire concepts. Considering that we are in a virtual environment, I'd very quickly share a few ground rules which will help us to ensure that we manage time. First is please stay on mute because we have a lot of people joining in today. So Sumitra will be putting everybody on mute. Whenever you have to speak or share any point, first option should be the chat box, which is open to everybody. If alternatively, you can also raise your hand and Sumitra will unmute you to share your thoughts. Second point is use the chat option essentially that I already said. For any questions that you will have throughout the session, feel free to make a note of it or just type it in the chat box. We will be using the last 10 minutes to address any questions. If there is a situation where we have more questions and we won't be able to cater them while in the session, we will be glad to connect afterwards and kind of one-on-one help you with those scenarios. Last but not the least, this is Sumitra's favorite. So participate, participate, and participate. So we will expect 100% participation in next 1 hour. Let's move on, Sumitra. Thank you. I'll take you through the objectives of the program. Through this webinar, we are aiming that you when you go away after 1 hour, you basically learn to prioritize and organize your work better, identify what are your time wasters, and what are the ways with which we can reduce the time wasters. And last but not the least is deal with the interruptions or anything else which steals your time in a normal work environment. There will be 7 takeaways that at least I would like you to walk away with by the end of this session. So I and Sumitra would basically be discussing time stealers, the type of tasks that we have in a normal work environment, Eisenhower Matrix, which essentially help us, which is also called the action priority matrix or the important versus urgent metrics, batch processing and 80-20 principle, time boxing. Last but not the least, we'll share a few additional tips to help manage our time better. All right, so having said that, let's see. Now, on one side, we have a poor professional reputation and the stalled career. Um, the other option that we have are the greater opportunities to achieve important life and career goals. Now, the question is, what bridges the gap between the two? And the answer will be right there in front of you, ladies and gentlemen. It is essentially doing the right thing at the right time, consistently, and with excellence. In other words, managing time is all about managing self. Before we move on, before Sumitra takes over for the next slide, just one request. If anyone at all at any point is not able to hear me or Sumitra clearly, immediately put it on chat and we'll be more than happy to repeat us for you. Right? Let's move on to the next slide, please, Sumitra.
Sure. So before I actually move on to the next slide, I'd like you guys to kind of think it through. I'm sure when we begin our day, or for a lot of us, when we walk out of a certain day, there are certain tasks that we plan for. And in spite of a lot of planning, there are times when we come across a situation that our to-do list become a not to-do list. I mean, there could be days even where you have exceeded the number of work hours. So instead of working for 8 or 9 hours, you'll end up working for 12 hours. And you yet realize that you haven't been able to accomplish really the tasks which are most important to you. Whereas, on the other hand, there are also days that we come across where we have to probably leave an hour early. or sometimes a half day, or sometimes it could be just a situation where you need to wrap up things really, really fast. And you realize that within 4 hours, you've accomplished so much more versus the 12 hours wherein you were busy doing a lot of things, but you really didn't accomplish so much. And that pretty much actually, brings me to the next question, that then, is time management really a skill set or a mindset? Because it's the same person, right? It's not that on one particular day the skill is there for that person and the other day it isn't. So what is it that we can do, for that matter, to ensure that the skills that we already have, we are good at managing time? Had it not been the case, then organizations wouldn't have been able to survive. But what is it that we can do consistently to ensure that we are able to use our existing time management skills actually more consistently, right? And we keep doing better, right? So that is something that now we would be quickly talking about. And to do that, I mean, before we get to the how bit, where we discuss, okay, how do we manage our time better? How can we be more productive? Let's take a step back and take a look at, why is it that we are not able to manage our time? What is stopping us? And this is something that Vishal had referred to, uh, a word, a phrase, whatever you can say, the time stealer. Right. What we'll try to do in this particular slide is, we'd like you to take a look at few of the reasons which we try to identify within our team from our experience of having worked with professionals. And we'd like you to take a look at it. Take about 15 seconds and let us know in the chat box, type it up in the chat box, which one among these 10 reasons is the biggest time stealer for you. Right. So we'll take you through those time stealers very, very quickly. The first one, interruptions. Second, you do not finish tasks. Third, if you all can see this, is the internet and the social media. I'll go to the next one, which is essentially inability to say no. Your a lot of time being lost in the approval process, the indecision, and you have unclear tasks and priorities, certain tasks which have been handed over to you, but you really don't know if that is important or not really. You have too many things to do, especially meetings sometimes can be very overwhelming. You're trying to work on too many things simultaneously, but you are not really finishing any one of them. And sorry, I think we are pretty much done with that. So that's about it. And of course, the last, I think, a favorite of many, changing priorities. अभी एक काम शुरू नहीं किया था कि दूसरा वाला चालू हो गया, राइट? अभी एक में काम शुरू कर रहे थे, बीच में से कुछ और ही प्रायोरिटी हो गया. So take a look at these options and let us know. Type it in the chat box and let us know, what is it that bothers you the most. And I think we already have a response from Pankaj, who says, well, yeah, internet and social media. Inability to say no, trying to do too many things.
Nayandeep says Netflix.
Somebody being very, very honest. We'll keep it to the webinar. There you go. Changing priorities. Okay, Gagandeep says it's interruptions. Poonam says it's unclear priorities again. A lot of people saying inability to say no, too many things, changing priorities, back-to-back chat messages. I hope, Karan, you're not referring to this one. Okay, we have from Nayan as well, again, WhatsApp, we have too many meetings. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll keep it till here, but I think we more or less have a rough idea about what are really, really the time stealers for at least this particular group of 50 odd people. I think inability to say no apparently comes out to be a big one. We have changing priorities. We have too many things to do, and things not being clear to us, what is really the priority as the big one. Thank you so much for your responses, everyone. What we'll try to do, yeah, and we still keep hearing inability to say no, that's a big one. So what we'll try to do as we take you through these various tools and techniques is see how we can best address this situation. right? So to take you through the next part, I would request Vishal to kind of take over, who's going to introduce us to the steps of the time management and then explain these bits in details as well. Vishal?
Thank you, Sumitra, and thank you everybody to kind of very quickly responding. I mean, this will ensure that we manage time well for the webinar. I think that's the stepping stone for us for the time management, right? So the 4 steps of time management that we recommend could be a good start to effective time management. The first one is planning, which in which we'll cover the Eisenhower Matrix, the one that I referred to before, which is also the action priority or urgent versus important metrics. It will help us to get a bird eye view of the tasks that we have. I mean, in reality, it's not that we don't know what other things that we have to do. All of that is in our head. Some people use different ways to list it down as well. But this tool really breaks it down and says, okay, what is your priority and what can be the second thing to do, right? The second part will be organizing, which now we have the tasks, we have prioritized the task. Now, how do we do it? The third part will be prioritizing, where we will discuss about the 80-20 principle that most of you would be familiar of, which is also known as the Pareto principle. Last but not the least, managing time to do the task that we have prioritized so far. It's about completion, really. Sumitra, thank you. Can we move on to the next slide? All right. Well, before we even talk about, I mean, this is something that you would have seen in various online blogs and maybe at your workplace trainings. Before we talk about this matrix, which is the time management matrix, or known as the important versus urgent matrix or the Eisenhower matrix, let's think about our usual day at work. Everyone will have their own ways to prioritize the task, one way or the other, right? But what happens is the very natural tendency that we are more likely to prioritize tasks which have a deadline over tasks without one, regardless of their importance, which essentially means that we are forming a cycle of tasks which were not urgent at that point can move to urgent. We'll talk about that in a while. Uh, First, let me give you a background of this important versus urgent metrics, right? This was coined by 2 times US President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was in military for a very long time. There were many initiatives that he started while he was serving his term as president. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Influential People, coined this matrix, and he kind of identified the ways that he used to do so much in very less time. This matrix helps you to distinguish between your urgent and important tasks. And how do we apply it to your big picture projects, which are essentially the long-term things, and your everyday tasks, which is essentially our to-do list for the day. Very quickly, I won't spend much time on it, but let's see what is really urgent and important. It's not that we don't know, but basis this matrix, urgent matters are those which require our immediate action. These are visible issues that pop up and demand your attention immediately. Often, urgent matters come with clear consequences for not completing these tasks. I will share a few examples when we move on to the next slide as well. These tasks are unavoidable, but if we spend too much time putting out fires, it can produce a great deal of stress and could result in burnout. The second quadrant is the important, which matters, but generally they contribute to the long-term goals. These require planning and thoughtful action. Now, when you focus on the important matters, for example, you manage your time, energy, and attention rather than mindlessly expending the resources. What is important is subjective, to be honest. I mean, everyone will have different tasks which they deem as important. It depends on your own values and your professional goals. So important is something that nobody else can define with you, whereas the urgent ones generally will be well defined with basically timelines. So, Mitra, can we very quickly let me just discuss the 4 quadrants and then we move on to the next slide. So the first one, which is the urgent and important task. Like I said, now urgent and important, they will demand you to take action immediately. They have visible deadlines and consequences if you don't take an action. Most often, these are the things that were sprung on you from an external source or things that we may have put off until faced with a looming deadline. Either way, this is essentially the crisis mode response. These needs to be done immediately. The second quadrant, which is the top right, not urgent, but important. These activities help us to achieve the long-term goals. They may not have a deadline or may not have an end date at all. which results in them being easy to put them off in a favor of more urgent tasks. However, if we think closely, these tasks have a much greater effect on our long-term effectiveness in completing goals. The third quadrant, which is the urgent and not important, these are not urgent, not important, but they generally keep us very busy. These tasks are often based on expectations set by others, and they don't help us move to the long-term goals, essentially. Moving on to the next slide, I'll give you an example of each one of these quadrants. If you look at the first one, which is urgent and important both. Some examples for that could be somebody called in sick and you have to take the project for that person. You can have client escalations, or your manager assigns a last minute task with a last minute deadline to you. Now, like I said, these quadrants they need to be done immediately. I mean, there is no way we can stop doing it, but the only challenge here is it can lead to increased stress and the sense that your days are getting out of your control. Second quadrant, which is, they are generally planning and long-term projects. For example, your professional networking, learning a new skill, or maybe at times keeping up with the current research in your field. At times, learning a new skill that can help you doing your task more effectively. This is the spot where we are not focused on the problems as with the quadrant one, but on the opportunities and the growth. This is the quadrant where if you're able to spend more time, we can grow our skills and energy, and we can contribute to accomplishing the meaningful goals. In other words, it will help us to release some of the stress from the quadrant one. The quadrant three is unnecessary interruptions from coworkers. It could be checking your phone on email, Netflix, responding to certain text, social media messages. Now, the thing with this quadrant three is they give us a feeling of urgent. I mean, at times the moment your phone will ring, it is very difficult to kind of not check it. But the only challenge with this one is they don't add to any of the productivity. They don't add any productivity to our daily tasks. The fourth quadrant, about which we have not spoken for quite long, these are the tasks which are neither urgent nor important. So, for example, watching TV, refreshing the social media feeds, sorting and organizing email, but not responding to it unless it becomes urgent. Essentially, these are some of the examples of the quadrants. Before we kind of move on to the next slide, Sumitra, I think it's time where you could share the story that we discussed about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Just before we move on to the next bit, actually, I would like to check if anybody is facing any issues related to connection. I hope we're audible to everyone. If it is, just let us know in the chat box. Before we move on to the next bit, let me take you back to a childhood story that most of you would have. Thank you, Saurav. Most of you would have heard, which is about two woodcutters, right? And both of them obviously had the same task, which is chopping off the wood. But one made more money than the other. So the other one, who wasn't making too much of money, was very curious to know what is it that the other one is doing so differently that allowed him to chop more woods and get more money. So when he kind of peeped a little bit into what is he doing differently, he figured out that the other person tends to spend a lot of time in sharpening his axe, right? And that in a way actually takes me to the next slide, which talks about the two kind of tasks that we deal with on a daily basis. And why we're sharing with you these two kind of tasks at this point is because the Eisenhower, or the important versus urgent matrix that we just now discussed, will be helpful if you're able to categorize your task in these two categories as well, if you're able to scan your tasks that ways. And you will notice that probably 90% of our day, or probably 80% of our day, and sometimes even 100, right, goes in doing the maintenance tasks. And for a lot of us, the struggle is really the progressive ones, right? And over a period of time, what really becomes a challenge is that that if we do not take care of the progressive task, they kind of tend to become maintenance over a period of time. It's like visiting the dentist, right? You can keep saying no to it annually for the longest time, But over a period of time, if you don't do that, it's bound to come back to you very hard. So even any sort of painkiller will not be able to sort it out, right? So just while you're using the Eisenhower matrix, do keep in mind these two types of tasks, and maybe not every day. This is not something that you could do every day, but at least on a weekly basis, when the week is over or before you're trying to start your week, do take a look at if did you spend your entire week on the maintenance task, or were you able to do a progressive task, right? And if you haven't been able to do it that week, which is okay, right, see if you can accommodate in the next week, right? So the next set of tools that Vishal is going to talk to you about will help you actually accommodate these progressive tasks a little better, because situation is not going to get any better, to be very honest. I mean, the other day I was talking to my husband about how this is like really impacting our productivity, and we were talking about situations that probably people are saving a lot of time because they're working from home, on traveling. You don't A lot of us, who travel from Delhi to Gurgaon, are saving a lot of hours in terms of traveling, but that hour is any which way is getting consumed in doing a lot of other tasks at home that we didn't even plan for, right? So it's not that working at home is not stressful. It gets any better. But that's the kind of dynamic situation that we deal with every day, whether we're working from home or we're working from our office. But the point is really, irrespective of that, sometimes progressive tasks are those nice breathers as well, because like they say, if we keep doing the maintenance tasks all the time, sometimes it does get boring and monotonous as well. So progressive tasks sometimes could be a nice refresher, in helping you sharpen your saw. A lot of us, and most importantly, what you got to remember about the progressive task is that it's really not about the quantity of time. It's not that you have to spend about an hour, but have you been able to spend at least little quality time in doing what you like doing, or investing time in something that you feel can largely contribute to the kind of work that you do? So, nevertheless, we just wanted to ensure that you are aware of the maintenance and the progressive, these two words, that every time you're planning a day, that am I spending too much on something and not paying attention to one at all. Um, Atul writes, work from home is actually more stressful. I tend to agree, Atul. And to be very honest, what we've tried to do towards the end of this take is share with you a couple of tips which will probably help you at least initiate the process of ensuring that work from home becomes a less stressful. I mean, see, utensils and mopping the floor, that isn't going out anytime soon, to be very honest. But let's see what we can do best with what we have on hand. So on that note, Vishal,
Sumitra, sorry, before we move on to the exercise, may I request you to go to the previous slide, please?
Yes. Previous slide, is it?
Yes, please. I think I gave a few examples of different kind of quadrants, but I think it's important that we tell how do we deal with those tasks, because the next exercise will essentially be what do we do, right? So, well, guys, if when we kind of put our tasks in these four quadrants, that is essentially the next exercise that we're going to do. The tasks that you put in the first quadrants, they needs to be done right away. I'm sure आपने slide पढ़ लिया होगा, but it's important that I tell you as well. The tasks that you put in quadrant 2, they needs to be done immediately, because like Sumitra just discussed about the progressive and maintenance tasks, right? The third one, which are urgent but not important, they need to be finished quickly. The difficult part is that dumping or postponing the tasks which are neither important and not even urgent. Yeah. Thank you. Let's move on to the exercise. So now for this exercise, I would like us to use the chat option again, like we used the last time. What we need to do is, so like you can see on the screen, Sumitra, if you can just display the activity, please. Thank you. So this is the exercise essentially. It has been an active week for you, right? It is Wednesday, which is today. And while leaving for the day, you identify the key tasks for Thursday, which is tomorrow. So on the first section, you would see the tasks that you would have already listed for tomorrow, which is your morning meeting, your daily dashboard, your weekly report to stakeholders, which has to go out today, work on the audit report to be submitted next week, new team member induction, somebody who just joined your team, scheduled coaching with one of the other team members, and meeting with your own manager. However, now, because we're working from home, you just realize there are new tasks that you have. Tomorrow you have shortage of staff. There is a client escalation that has come in. There's a sudden request from data from the legal team to be submitted today. An unplanned meeting with cross-functional teams. For your convenience, what we have done is we're kind of put in a table. Sumitra, may I request you to display the table? Okay. So here we have given few reference examples. I mean, like I said, each task will have different priority for everybody. So let's just focus on the first one, the important and urgent. The first, the previous slide did tell you these are the situations which demand urgent action. So these could be your crisis, any pressing problems, or projects which have close deadline. Now, for reference, we have rated it in 10, 5, and 3. You can also rate it from 1 to 5. This is the priority of task for you. So here is what I would like you to do. You have the list of the tasks on the left-hand side. Take about 30 seconds to review them. In 30 seconds, use the chat option to mention the tasks that you would put under the first quadrant, which is important and urgent at the same time. All right, so let's take 30 seconds, review the tasks, and put the tasks that you think will be under urgent and important quadrant, and which you would essentially rate 10, and just put it in the chat box. All right, you have 30 seconds starting now, please.
We have the first response from Nayan already. Thank you, Nayan.
Thank you, Sumitra. All right, so Pankaj says 1 and 3 option, morning meeting and weekly report. And you got new team member induction, shortage of staff, sudden request from data, client escalation, important, urgent, Saurabh. Atul says weekly report. All right, thank you for the responses, guys. In our perspective, the things which are important and demand the immediate attention. I mean, most of the responses that I see are absolutely bang on. Sumitra, can we just show a sample of the task list as per us, which can be put under urgent and important? All right. So under crisis, like shortage of staff, which needs immediate attention, the client escalation, which will have direct consequences if that is not attended immediately. Your morning meeting, which essentially helps you to plan the day. Project with close deadline, because daily dashboard and weekly report, that will have a close deadline. If it doesn't go, again, that can have certain consequences as well. Again, like I said, it could be subjective for different people. Our perspective of what are the tasks that we can put in important and urgent is displayed on the screen. Now let's look at the tasks again. Let's see what do we put under the second quadrant, which is important but not urgent. So like we discussed, it involves tasks which is your preparation, your planning, looking for new opportunities. So take another 30 seconds and say what are the things that you would put under important but not urgent. Swapna says audit report, and Mishraji says new team member audition. Okay. Sudden request data from legal, daily dash. Thank you everybody. Let's say, Sumitra, can we just display in our perspective, what are the things that we can put under important but not urgent metrics? Thank you for the responses, everybody. I think most of us got this absolutely right. Submitting the audit report, which will help us to ensure कि next week में वो urgent or important ना हो जाए. And then you got the team induction, coaching, and meeting up with your manager to ensure that everything is going as planned, right? All right, well, now let's move on to the third one, which is urgent but not important. Have a look at the tasks again, the remaining tasks, and let's see what are the things that we can put under urgent but not important quadrant. All right. Rakesh says request for data, unplanned meeting, sudden request from data. I think this one is easy. जो भी बाकी दोनों में नहीं हो यहाँ डाल दो. So I think it's time when we kind of show what is it in our perspective, essentially. Okay, well, I think most of us got it bang on. The request for data, checking emails, and unplanned meetings, right? Now, one thing that we need to keep in mind while we are using this grid is, it will take time if you have to do this daily. It's not that you cannot. This is a very dynamic grid. The best way is to use it to essentially plan your week in advance. You can use it every day, but then it will take a lot of time if you do it every day. If you do it every day, it's important that you revisit the tasks daily to see if there is anything that has changed, right? Sumitra, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, Vishal, I think you've pretty much well summarized the point in terms of, actually emphasizing on the point that we need to revisit this script because it is dynamic in nature. Kyunki 9 baje hum banate hain, and then if you go and visit this at 5 o'clock, something that may not be viable, right? So the only recommendation that I would have, and at least what I've heard from people who have used this and have been able to successfully plan their days, that they visit at least at every 2 hours gap, right? Or whenever they take those small breathers, when they come back, they kind of take a look at this grid. In fact, I have seen in a lot of organizations, they've actually improvised on this grid in a very, very different way, and they have given it their own shape and form. So a lot of times, rather than actually saying important, urgent, and so on and so forth, in a couple of organizations that I've gone and conducted the training, they would have said that, okay, we call it, well, we give it colors, red, amber, green. The red one, बहुत खतरनाक वाले हैं, important as well as urgent. So in terms of adding the value to the task as well, I mean, out here we've put 10, 5, and 3. Of course, improvise it. And see if you can want to do it a 1, 2, 3. That also works. We have I think a question from Swapna, and she says sometimes our perspective of the urgency and importance of the task may be different from our manager. How do we deal with that? Thank you, Swapna, for that question. As far as urgency and the importance of the task is concerned, like Vishal specified very, very nicely, that urgency most of the times are deadline driven. However, as far as the importance of the task is concerned, if I go by the books, it's normally said the tasks which have a direct impact on your KPI or your KRA, that is important. Now, if I were to say that in case it's different from that of the manager, then well, it kind of says that somewhere down the line, we're not clear about what is really important for the team and what is not. And to help you actually understand this better so that this can be addressed the right way, we will take you through certain tools which will help you actually prioritize. And in situations where you feel that you're not able to prioritize, how do you position yourself in front of your manager? How do you share your priorities, right, in front of your manager, saying कि मेरे हिसाब से ये है, because if we do it, this is the फायदा, if we don't do it, this is the नुकसान. How do we do it? But for that, you'll have to Sapna wait for a couple of more slides, because that is what has helped you, give you a more clear perspective about what the priority should be. But having said that, even after a lot of explanation, if your boss or your manager, your supervisor still says, well, no, this is something that needs to be done, and it could be any stakeholder for that matter. Sometimes we have to give in, sometimes that's a kind of businesses that we deal with. But if you're doing it consistently, then that's something that you need to talk to your manager about, is what I would at least recommend. Rajneesh have mentioned this. Please show the previous slide again with filled data. So Rajneesh, I am going to take you to the previous slide with the filled data, if this helps you, before we move on quickly to the other tools. Right? You could take a quick picture of it, Rajneesh, and before we quickly...
Alternatively, we'll also be sending actually the deck to you guys so that, the reference becomes easy.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. We'll quickly move on to the next bit then, which is the second step, and which is about batch processing. Vishal, over to you, please.
Thank you, Sumitra. So, well, the second part is batch processing, which is one technique which can be used to achieve more efficiency and to be more productive. So, what it does is it's a system where time is blocked to complete different tasks at one time. So, what we do in this one, in simple terms, is we group the tasks which are similar in nature. For example, responding to the emails that you receive every day. Let's say, and responding to the calls, or maybe you have to make a few client calls. So what I'll do is I'll kind of batch these tasks together and I'll block a time. For example, I say 9 to 9:30 in the morning. I will reply to all the emails and then I will just make all the calls that I have to do. And between 9 to 12, maybe I don't check if anything is not urgent. At 12, may say, okay, now next for another 15 minutes, I'll check my emails and make important calls. The benefit of batch processing is it ensures that you have a rhythm because you're doing similar tasks together. You will be more focused on the tasks that you will be doing. The error rate will be very less. And since you will be very efficient, there will be a sense of satisfaction. You will be able to complete the task with quality. Uh, for example, if we go to the exercise that I think we did, just the previous few slides, if you, for example, group the meeting and, your reports, the data that you have to send to the legal team, working on the data for 2 or 3 tasks will make it one simple thing, and you will be able to achieve more in less time. Sumitra, anything that you want to add here?
Yeah, just to kind of add in, just remember cooking a lot of times is batch processing, especially the Chinese way of cooking, you will notice that everything that needs to be chopped, everything that needs to be added, is something that the chef gets ready first before he gets to the wok, right? Batch processing is something like that. Having said that, this is one of the tools. There will be days on which we may not be able to do batch processing, but knowing it, when you have the opportunity, use it. Just to kind of give you one more example, sometimes you may notice कि आपने decide कर लिया कि चलो ये 3 report है ना, आज 11 से 12 में बैठ के सारे reports जितने हैं खत्म कर लेते हैं. But just when it's 11:45, you see your boss walking up to you and telling you that, well, something more urgent has come up. His stakeholder has asked for something and you need to deliver that. Now, normal tendency is that the moment you get something from the stakeholder saying कि ये अभी के अभी देना है, ये बहुत urgent है, आधे घंटे में देना है, we immediately switch from one task to the other. And that is what experts recommend कि आपको मिला है टास्क ठीक है कि अर्जेंट है, आधे घंटे में देना है, लेकिन जो काम आप कर रहे थे, the task that you were doing already, don't let it go then and there. Work on it for 5 minutes at least more to know where you're closing, to give it a proper closure, right? And then go to the task, which is inevitable. You have to do, if the stakeholders ask for the next 30 minutes, you have to give it, right? But what it does is that you don't have, divided attention then. कि वो दूसरा वाला काम आपने कहाँ पे खत्म करा हुआ है, right? And when you come back, actually, your ability to regain focus on that task is a lot higher. So while batch processing encourages people to finish a task when you're working on that, of course, depending on the kind of day, the kind of environment that we are in, sometimes we may have to use our own style as well. And that's one way to do batch processing, right? So that's something that I kind of wanted to add in before we move on actually to the next bit, which most of us are aware of. So Vishal, if you could quickly take us through that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that people are very familiar with, prioritizing, or Pareto principle rule, which is essentially the 80-20. What it says is essentially in project management, 20% of the work consumes the 80% of time. I'll start with a classic example, which I have, because I've trained extensively in ITs. So whenever there's a new project, the 80% of the time that they spend goes in the initial phase and the delivery phase. Rest of it is just procrastination. So what this principle really says is we need to identify what is that 20% that we need to do that will have the 80% impact on the results that we have to achieve. It could be your business results, it could be your sales numbers, it could be what is the 20% that is adding to the 80% of your KPIs, right? So this is an individual thing. Effectively, where it helps is if we remember the first box, urgent as well as important. अगर वहां पे आप पे 3-4 चीजें हैं, then you can't work on all 4 things at the same time, right? uh, and that is where you will apply this rule and say यार इन दोनों में से कौन सी ऐसी चीज है जिनका ना सबसे ज्यादा impact हो सकता है, and we start focusing on that first to ensure that we get the most results, right? Anything you want to add, Sumitra, before we move ahead?
Yes, absolutely. और ये box जो है, the one that Vishal actually mentioned, is the most खतरनाक box, right? Sometimes out of the 5, maybe you figured out कि ये 5 में से 2 काम ऐसे हैं which is 20% and will have 80% impact. But now applying Pareto on Pareto is like even a difficult task. So one of the things that I actually learned from one of the stories actually was a concept called the Buridian's donkey. You know, it talks about a very, very simple situation that there are two donkeys. There is a donkey who is equally thirsty and equally hungry, right? And the donkey can't decide that should it drink first, should it eat first, because it can see at an equal distance it has a barrel of water, and at an equal distance it sees a stack of hay, right? So the donkey is very worried, खाना है कि पीना है, पिएंगे तो खाने के वजह से मर जाएंगे, खाएंगे तो पीने के वजह से, मतलब प्यास की वजह से मर जाएंगे. So over a period of time you can imagine what would have happened to the donkey, right? And none of us would want to get into that situation. So where you get to a situation where you feel that there are two tasks which are equally important and equally urgent, and even Pareto is not able to kind of crack it, that's when you do the Buridan's donkey concept. You have task A and task B. You ask yourself, if you do not do task A, what is the consequence? Nuksan kya hoga? And if you do not do task B, तो फिर नुकसान कितना होगा? जिस टास्क में ना करने के वजह से नुकसान is higher, you go ahead with that task, because damage management has to be done in both. अब जिसमें ज्यादा है वो सबसे पहले कर लो, right? Because at some point of time we have to be realistic. You have two hands and you have one brain. You can work on certain things at a time once only. Now, having said that, a lot of us could be in a people manager role, could be team leads as well out here, and I'm sure we do have the option of delegating some of the tasks, whether it's lateral, upward, or downward delegation. But having said that, even to be able to delegate, we need to prioritize कि हाँ भाई कौन सा मुझे करना है, and which is the one that we can give it off to someone else or ask for somebody else's support. So as far as the Pareto principle is concerned, that is just about you enabling you to manage your first box, right? From this point, we will now move on to the next point, which is essentially about the box which had tasks which were important लेकिन urgent नहीं था. So how do you ensure, क्योंकि वो box सबसे ज़्यादा suffer करता है, right? सबसे ज़्यादा neglected है, right? So how do we manage that box, or the items in those box, is something that Vishal will be able to help us understand. Vishal, if you could take over this.
Thank you, Sumitra. So this box, like we discussed, I mean, this box generally at times may not have a deadline, and that's why it becomes very easy to procrastinate the tasks which generally fall in these box. But होता ये है कि इन टास्क को procrastinate करेंगे तो बहुत जल्दी ये लेफ्ट वाले बॉक्स में आ जाएंगे, important and urgent both हो जाएंगे. And most of the tasks that you will have here will help you to plan ahead and make your life less stressful. So the technique that we use here is called time boxing to do these tasks. Time boxing, it's a very simple funda, which is essentially fixing a time period to work on a task or a group of tasks that you have in that box, right? And the most important part here is that instead of working on the task until it's done, you won't move on to any other task. I'll give you a small example. Let's say abhi humne just one second. All right. For example, the one example that we discussed कि हमको एक marketing को report भेजना है next week, right? Or I know that it will take me 2 hours to design that report. और मेरे पास 4 दिन का time है. So simply I'll just box or maybe block 30 minutes each day to ensure कि मेरे 2 घंटे का 4 दिन में spread out हो जाए, so that I don't feel stressed. And when there is time to send that report, I have it ready. The good part about this practice is it also enables you to communicate and collaborate with other people easily, right? I'll share a sample with you that I use at my workplace to kind of manage my to time box myself, and maybe I can share it with you over an email as well. I'll show a sample in the next slide. जहाँ पे मैंने दिन के ना 2 या 3 घंटे, जैसे for example, I mean the one that you see on the screen, what I've done is the first thing that I do is let's say 8:30 to 10 मैं सिर्फ the tasks that I have, the progressive tasks that I have to do, I've blocked it for that. मैं हफ्ते में 3 दिन वो के लिए ही block करके रखता हूँ. And then if I have to do certain updates on the website that our organization has, I use my Thursday for it. So this is what you can use to kind of plan your tasks better to ensure कि आपका जो first box का load है ना वो बड़े नहीं बल्कि कम से कम होता रहे, क्योंकि रिमेंबर वी डिस्कस फर्स्ट बॉक्स में जितने ज्यादा चीजें रहेंगे उतना ज्यादा स्ट्रेस होगा। एंड बहुत सारी चीजें फर्स्ट बॉक्स में इसलिए आ जाती हैं क्योंकि हम उनको तब केटर नहीं कर पाते जब वो इंपॉर्टेंट होती है, लेकिन तब अर्जेंट नहीं होती क्योंकि उसमें डेडलाइन नहीं है, right? Yeah, so I think that's pretty much about time boxing. Anything you want to add, Smitra?
No, Vishal, I think we can push off to the next slide. Yeah.
All right. Well, now this is a concept which is also known as flow state. Which essentially is the time when you feel that you are most productive, because nobody else would be able to know. For example, I work with my colleague Sumitra, and she's most productive from 10 to 11 in the morning, but I'm sleepy at that time. There's quite a possibility. Maybe I'm super productive in evening at 4 to 5. So this is something which is more of a self-realization or maybe self-inspection, and saying that what is time where I am most productive. It will take a serious period of self-reflection, right? Honestly, take a look at your day and note कब आप सबसे ज्यादा एनर्जेटिक होते हो और कब नहीं होते हो, क्योंकि जब आप एनर्जेटिक ही नहीं हो तो आप बैठे रहोगे, क्या फायदा होगा? I mean, how many times you would just be staring at your screen but not doing things, right? Everyone goes through that phase. उसका कोई फायदा नहीं है, right? Chances are that you would already know कि कब आप सबसे ज्यादा productive हो. Let's start there. If you know कि in the morning you are not very productive, उस time पे maybe आप planning और ये सारी चीजें उस time पे रख लो, right? Don't do things which will require a lot of focus. In addition to your own findings, take a look at your daily schedule and see कि किस time पे आप बहुत सारे task कर पा रहे हो, and see if that is your peak time. One other way is asking your colleagues कि यार किस time पे I'm being more productive. And that's the second stage. First is self-reflect. Identify what are your peak times. जो भी आपके difficult tasks हैं वो वहाँ पे आप करो. Anything you want to add before I move on to the tips? How do we?
Yeah. But just in reference
Sure.
to the current situation, actually, to be very honest, I'm a mother to a 7-year-old, and I'm sure a lot of you would realize that these days Zoom classes, the online classes are going on. So my daughter's classes actually happen between 11 to 12:30, and to be very honest, I'm aware of that time, that is the time when I'm least productive. Right. Also, the kind of work that I do involves a lot of creative thinking a lot of times. And given the current situation, sometimes it's very, very difficult to pull up a chain of thought and write something creatively. So one of the things that I try to do on days where I feel that it's getting difficult, when I'm working from home, especially, because the focus is just not there, is that I tend to work on the tasks which doesn't require so much of my brain, right? And put up probably block time between the 11 to 12:30 wala window, which doesn't require too much of my brain power that ways, right? In fact, what I tend to do is that sometimes I tend to log out a little early, probably at 30 minutes early when I can. I'm not saying do it every day. And when my daughter goes to sleep, between 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock is the time actually that I can actually think very well. And that's my prime time, is what I've realized a lot of times. I'm not saying exceed your working hours, right? But you got to understand your own way and style of working, and you have to figure out what your where are your prime time, where your prime time is, and work accordingly to that. So that's something that I use. Figure out what works for you, and then it probably might get a little easier. From here on, we'll move on to the next bit, which is quickly. Vishal will walk us through the quick ways of staying productive. Vishal, if you may.
Sure. Thank you, Sumitra. I think first is to look at your to-do list each morning and assign tasks which require the most brain power. जो आपको सबसे ज़्यादा focus है, सबसे ज़्यादा difficult task लग रहे हैं ना, वो अपने peak time पे will have to set, right? Now, if you are like me, a person who is very difficult to, for me, focusing early morning becomes very difficult, right? तो उस time पे मैं क्या करता हूँ, वो task करता हूँ that don't make, which don't need much focus. जैसे, checking my emails, maybe designing something in which I'm good at, so मुझे ज़्यादा सोचना नहीं पड़ता है. That's what I do. The other things that we can do is at times, for most of us, what happens is after lunch it becomes very difficult to focus. So after lunch, maybe half an hour, जब आपको कुछ ऐसी चीज करो जिस पर बहुत ज्यादा फोकस नहीं करना है. Maybe meet with a colleague, follow up on a project, just go through the things that you have done. And one other thing that you can do is, healthy pick-me-ups during your least productive times. For example, just take a walk around. Just eat something, have some snacks if you can. I don't know the fifth point how relevant it will be for most of us, but adjust your work hours to make sure you're working during the best hours, right? At times, instead of 9, if you're able to manage that, up now 9 बजे की जगह 8:30 ऑफिस पहुंच जाओ तो हो सकता है आप ज्यादा प्रोडक्टिव हो. I mean, that's something that we'll have to give a thought. The most important one, other than these tips, is the break. So, can we move on to the next slide, please? And this is one of the studies that was taken from MIT, essentially, which says that the human brain is only capable of focusing or concentration maximum for 90 minutes, right? इसीलिए हम जो भी ट्रेनिंग वगैरह भी कराते हैं ना, वी इंश्योर कि 90 मिनट्स में एक ना एक ब्रेक आए जरूर, क्योंकि उसके बाद just the retention power will slowly diminish, right? So try and see if you can implement that in a habit. I mean, generally what used to happen कि break लेने में लोग को लगता था कि ये बहुत break लेता है and all. But I mean, in reality, if you really have to be productive, it's important कि आप 90 minutes से ज़्यादा where possible don't focus too much. Take a break of 10 minutes and then get back to work.
In
You will
fact,
feel much. Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. I mean, when I do this, I feel more energetic and more focused when I come back from short breaks, right?
In fact, given the fact that we are all working from home, and I saw one of the participants writing work from home is even more stressful, it's because we do not organize our breaks a lot of times. Ensure that you're taking break after an hour. I mean, everybody have our attention span, so take your breaks accordingly. Agar aapko lagta hai you cannot take a 15 minutes break at one go, take a 5 minutes break. Right, drop it in your group chat, Microsoft Teams, jo bhi aap use kar rahe ho, drop out there, just guys will be off for 5 minutes, and be honest to your break also. Matlab wahan pe bhi don't be toggling around your emails. Take proper lunch break, take a full 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever your organization allow. Take the break properly and be honest to your break, just like you're honest to your work, right? Because when we're working in normally when we work from office, you still have 10 people to kind of talk to, but in work from home sometimes it is very stressful because you can't even vent out a lot of times if you're not really happy with your supervisor, right? So how do you do that? Take the break and probably stress kam nahi hoga shayad, lekin badega bhi nahi, right? On that note, what we have is we'd recommend you quickly a good read, because that's all we had to share in terms of tools. एक घंटे में ज़्यादा tools बता देंगे आप लोग फिर, it's too much to digest also. But this is a very nice book that we kind of have followed. We've been benefited largely. A lot of the tools and techniques that we have shared, especially the prime time that Vishal mentioned, is from this book written by Brian Tracy. You can in fact watch a lot of his videos on YouTube as well, wherein he talks about various tips, various things that you can do to be more productive in a day. Right. So this is a recommendation that we'd have. Of course, there are many other books, but it's an old one. But sometimes, it's always good to go back to old things. On that note, just like to check with everyone in case you guys have any questions for us. The forum is open. Please pop in your question, or you can unmute yourself to ask Vishal and me any question. We'll be more than happy to answer. You can drop it in the chat box. Do we have? Okay, I do not see anything on the chat coming up.
So what we'll be doing is I have shared a link for your feedback where that's me, Sumitra, where you can your valuable feedback would be welcome, and also we'll use that for your attendance point of view, right? What we'll be doing is we'll also be sharing our we are on Facebook, and you can follow us there. We'll share our email address where you can just put in any questions that you will have. We'll be happy to answer.
Okay, we have a question from Nayan who says, what about tips from work from home? So as far as work from home, just to kind of summarize from what we have discussed, see, each of these tools can be very well used to organize work at a personal front as well. Like I said, because we're working from home, yes, it could be more stressful. So one of the things that we definitely follow in our organization is log in or log out ka time में बिल्कुल compromise नहीं करने का, right? If you are to log out at 4:30, if you are to log out at 5:30, do that, right? Because sometimes क्या होता है, because we are in front of the laptop और कुछ है नहीं तो mails आते रहते हैं, and हम respond करते रहते हैं, calls होते रहते हैं. So see how you can utilize it to the best of your opportunity. Like I said, I cannot overemphasize on this, but taking break is definitely very, very important. Figure out the part of the day, like I shared with you. I have a certain part of the day where I'm not productive, right? Be honest to that. If you're not productive during that time, find out tasks which will not require too much of your brain power to do during that time, right? And most importantly, last but not the least, sometimes, you know what, I've seen a lot of my colleagues actually do this. Connect with people, have a video chat with your team members, probably with the team every Friday, or maybe somewhere in the midweek. Sometimes, just meeting up people, knowing that you have people around you, could be less stressful as far as work from home is concerned. Rest, like I mentioned, we have a scarcity of time, so we will share with you the deck. As far as additional tips of working from home, we are going to be sharing with each one of you that as well. But thank you so much for being a part of the session. I think we're approaching the 5 o'clock time. Do fill up the feedback, and thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.